The police found the house exactly as the boy had described it. The front door was still locked from the inside. The television was quietly glowing in the living room, and a trail of wet footprints led from the kitchen to the top of the stairs. But none of that frightened the investigators the most. It was the voice captured on the emergency call, a voice that quietly asked, "Is he asleep yet?" Welcome to The Unknown Files X, where real stories, dark mysteries, and hidden truths are told. In the fall of 2003, a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, became the center of a mystery that still has no official explanation. For years, everyone believed it was nothing more than the imagination of a frightened child. Then, investigators listened to the emergency recording again. What they heard forced them to reopen questions they thought had already been answered. It all began with a boy named Ethan. He was 9 years old. His family lived in a small 2-story house at the end of a peaceful street where everyone knew everyone else. Nothing exciting ever happened there. Kids played outside until dark. Neighbors borrowed lawnmowers without asking. Most people didn't even bother locking their doors during the day. It was the last place anyone expected something terrifying to happen. On a cool Friday evening, a loud crash echoed through the neighborhood. A utility truck had slammed into a power pole only a few streets away. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights lit up the sky. Curious neighbors stepped outside to see what had happened. Ethan had fallen asleep early after complaining of a headache. His parents didn't want to wake him. They figured they would only be gone for 10 or 15 minutes. They locked the front door behind them and walked outside. It was a decision they would regret for the rest of their lives. Around 11:47 that night, Ethan suddenly opened his eyes. Something had disturbed his sleep. At first he thought it had been a dream. Then he heard it again. Someone was humming. The sound drifted through the floorboards from downstairs. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frightening. If anything, it sounded peaceful, but something deep inside him knew it didn't belong there. He climbed out of bed and slowly walked toward his parents' room. The bed was empty. He whispered, "Mom?" Silence. "Dad?" Nothing. The humming continued below, slow, patient, almost as if whoever was making the sound already knew he was awake. His heartbeat quickened. He walked into the hallway and looked down the staircase. The living room was dark except for the pale blue glow of the television. The screen wasn't showing a program. It was just glowing with empty static. Ethan had no idea why, but he suddenly felt like he wasn't alone anymore. He carefully stepped down each stair, trying not to make a sound. The humming stopped. The silence that followed felt even worse. He reached the bottom of the staircase. The kitchen was just around the corner. Then a voice quietly spoke, "You shouldn't be awake." Ethan froze. The voice belonged to an older woman sitting at the kitchen table. She hadn't been there a second earlier, or maybe she had. He honestly couldn't tell. The room was so dark that he could only make out her outline beneath the moonlight coming through the window. Her long gray hair covered most of her face. Her hands rested calmly on the table. She wasn't moving. She wasn't blinking. She was simply watching him. Instinctively, Ethan reached toward the light switch. "Please don't." Her voice remained soft. "Leave the lights off." Without understanding why, he listened. She smiled. "I've been waiting for you." Ethan swallowed hard. "My parents are home," he whispered. The woman slowly shook her head. "No, they had to leave. They asked me to stay with you." There was something strange about the way she spoke. Every sentence came after a long pause, almost as though she was remembering how people talked. She slowly stood from her chair. That's when Ethan noticed something odd. The floor beneath her feet looked wet, not soaked, not dripping, just damp enough to catch the moonlight. She took one slow step forward. A footprint remained behind, then another, each one darker than the last. Ethan couldn't stop staring. The woman noticed. She smiled again. "You see them too?" Another step. "We should leave now." Another footprint. "They'll be back soon." Ethan backed away. "I don't want to go." Her smile disappeared. "You don't belong here anymore." Those words echoed through the empty house. For just a second, everything became perfectly still. Then someone unlocked the front door. His parents rushed inside, laughing nervously as they talked about the accident outside. The moment Ethan saw them, he ran. He threw his arms around his mother. He was shaking so badly he could barely speak. "The lady..." His father looked confused. "What lady?" "The one in the kitchen." The one who wanted me to leave. His parents exchanged nervous glances. His father immediately walked toward the kitchen. Nobody was there. The chair near the table had fallen onto its side. The back door stood wide open. Cold night air drifted into the room. "Ethan," his mother called softly. "Are you sure someone was here?" He pointed toward the floor. "There." Both parents looked down. Neither of them said a word. A trail of wet footprints stretched across the kitchen tiles. His father followed them. They led through the hallway, past the staircase, halfway up the stairs. Then, they stopped. Not faded, not dried, stopped, as if whoever had made them had simply vanished. A chill swept through the house. His mother immediately dialed 911. While she spoke with the dispatcher, Ethan refused to let go of her hand. The dispatcher calmly asked whether anyone else was still inside the home. Before either parent could answer, Ethan quietly whispered, "She's upstairs." The dispatcher heard him. "Who's upstairs, sweetheart?" Ethan stared toward the second floor. "The lady. She's waiting." His father grabbed a flashlight and searched every room. Closets, bathrooms, under beds, the attic. Nothing. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. No place for anyone to hide. Yet when officers arrived minutes later, they found exactly what Ethan had described. The television was still glowing. The wet footprints were still visible, and beside the kitchen sink sat a small glass jar. Nobody in the family recognized it. Inside was a clear, oily substance with a sharp chemical smell. One officer carefully picked it up using gloves. Another continued photographing the footprints. Then something unexpected happened. An older detective quietly asked Ethan a question. "Can you describe the woman?" Ethan thought for a moment. "She looked slippery." The detective frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. She looked wet, like she had something all over her." The detective stopped writing. He slowly looked toward the jar sitting on the kitchen counter, then toward the open back door, then back at Ethan. No one realized it at the time. But that strange little detail would eventually connect the mysterious visitor to something far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. And what investigators discovered the following morning made them wonder if the woman had ever intended to leave that house alive. The detective asked Ethan to repeat exactly what the woman had said, not what he thought she meant, not what he remembered years later, but the exact words. Ethan closed his eyes. For several long seconds, he didn't speak. Then he quietly said, "She told me. They weren't coming back." The room fell silent. His mother immediately corrected him. "No, sweetheart. We're right here." Ethan shook his head. "Not you. The other ones." Everyone looked confused. "The other ones?" the detective asked. Ethan nodded. "She said this wasn't their first house." Those 7 words changed the entire direction of the investigation. At first, the detectives believed Ethan was simply mixing dreams with reality. Children often remembered frightening events differently, especially after experiencing trauma. But one detective couldn't stop thinking about the strange chemical residue inside the glass jar. It wasn't something you'd normally find in an ordinary home. The jar was sent to a state laboratory the next morning. While they waited for the results, officers searched the surrounding neighborhood. Most neighbors reported seeing the flashing lights from the utility truck crash. Several remembered Ethan's parents standing outside with everyone else. No one admitted seeing an older woman walking through the neighborhood. Then an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Dalton mentioned something odd. She hadn't seen a woman, but she had seen someone standing behind Ethan's upstairs bedroom window. At first, she assumed it was Ethan looking outside, but now she wasn't so sure. The detective asked what made her question it. Mrs. Dalton frowned. The person was too tall. Ethan was just a little boy. This person nearly reached the top of the window. That wasn't possible. Whoever stood in Ethan's bedroom couldn't have been him. Police searched the second floor again, this time more carefully. They measured the footprints, photographed every room, checked the attic insulation for signs of movement. Nothing. No fingerprints, no broken locks, no DNA. It was as though someone had walked into the house, then simply disappeared. 3 days later, the laboratory report arrived. The substance inside the jar wasn't blood. It wasn't paint. It wasn't oil. It was an industrial fire retardant gel. the same type firefighters used around hazardous chemical fires. That immediately caught the detective's attention. Only one place nearby had been covered in that exact material the night Ethan was left alone: the crashed utility truck. Investigators returned to the accident scene. They questioned firefighters again. Most of them remembered nothing unusual, until one veteran firefighter slowly raised his hand. There was someone. Everyone turned toward him. He explained that while crews were extinguishing the fire, he briefly saw what looked like an older woman standing near the tree line across the road. She wasn't watching the fire. She was watching the neighborhood. He assumed she lived nearby. When another firefighter looked in her direction a few seconds later, she was gone. The detective asked why he hadn't included that in his original statement. The firefighter shrugged. Because she disappeared before anyone else saw her. I figured I imagined it. The investigation suddenly became much more complicated. Detectives searched public records for elderly women living near the neighborhood. One name kept appearing: Margaret Holloway. She had lived less than a mile away, 27 years earlier. According to local records, Margaret had disappeared without a trace. No body, no suspects, nothing. Her abandoned home had eventually been demolished. Curiously, her disappearance happened after another house fire, one that investigators had never been able to explain. The detective requested every file connected to Margaret. Most of the paperwork was ordinary: witness interviews, photographs, search reports. Then, he found something buried inside an old statement. A young police officer had written, "Several witnesses reported seeing an elderly woman knocking on doors shortly before the fire. Description could not be confirmed." The detective leaned back in his chair. He read the sentence again. Then again. It couldn't be. The witness descriptions were almost identical to Ethan's. Gray hair, thin build, soft voice, calm behavior, always appearing just before or during a fire, always disappearing afterward. No arrests had ever been made. No explanation had ever been found. Weeks passed. The investigation slowly went cold. People stopped talking about it. The laboratory closed its file. Insurance investigators ruled out any connection between the utility truck crash and Ethan's home. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least everyone pretended it had. But Ethan never forgot. For years, he refused to sleep with his bedroom door closed. Every night before bed, he checked every room in the house, twice, sometimes 3 times. His parents thought the fear would eventually disappear. It never did. Nearly 20 years later, after both of his parents had passed away, Ethan finally requested a copy of the original 911 recording. He wanted closure. Instead, he found another mystery. Modern audio software had become much better than what police used back in 2003. An audio technician cleaned the recording to remove static and background noise. That's when they heard it. Not Ethan, not his parents, not the dispatcher. Another voice, barely louder than a whisper. It appeared just before the dispatcher asked, "Who's upstairs?" The whisper said only 5 words. "He's almost ready now." No one has ever identified where that voice came from. Some investigators believe it was simply radio interference. Others think someone accidentally spoke over another emergency frequency. And some believe the voice came from inside Ethan's house. Ethan refuses to listen to the recording ever again. He says one detail still keeps him awake at night. It isn't the woman. It isn't the footprints. It isn't even the mysterious voice. It's something he remembered years later. Something he never told the police. As the woman took her final step toward him, she smiled, looked directly past him toward the front door, and quietly said, "They're early." She knew his parents were coming home, before they even reached the house. If this story kept you watching until the end, don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss another mystery here on the Unknown Files X. Because sometimes, the most terrifying visitors are the ones who already know exactly when you'll be home alone.